Welcome to the True and Constant podcast presented by Gamma Phi Beta Sorority. Each month, incredible alumni of our sisterhood join us to celebrate their stories, experiences, and pearls of wisdom in Gamma Phi Beta and beyond. We are your hosts, Lex Stewart and Emma Oremus. Emma, how are you doing today?
Lex, I am doing fabulous. It's a new year. It's our 150th anniversary of sisterhood, which I absolutely cannot believe. I'm just so excited to be kicking off this amazing series, talking to such accomplished, successful, and wise women and being able to share that with everyone.
Heck yes.
Heck yes.
Well, today we have a trailblazer both of Gamma Phi Beta and of our nation. So she is not only the very first guest that we've ever had on the podcast, but she is also one of the first 5 female Secret Service agents in the United States. Kathryn Childers is joining us today. She is an alumni of the University of Colorado-Boulder, the Beta Rho chapter. How are you doing today, Kathryn? How have you been?
I'm terrific. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad we can celebrate 150 years. You know, I've had a lot more time to wait for the celebration than you all have. So I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely.
We're excited to talk to you. You're just absolutely amazing. And I think we're going to have some fun stories ahead of us today.
Well, I hope so, if I can remember them.
I have full confidence in us to be able to remember some of these stories. So Kathryn, something that's been on my mind as I've read your book and I've looked at some of your videos is that you've done something that is truly groundbreaking. I think like a trailblazer is an adjective that's also often associated with you. Can you tell us more about why you chose the path in the Secret Service? Like, how did you end up in the Secret Service as one of the first 5 female secret agents?
Well, the first thing is I didn't choose it. That's part of my message as I talk around the country to particularly young women and women my age and men and everyone, is that you don't necessarily choose an incredible career. Oftentimes you just bundle up everything you've ever done and you have no idea what you want to do, but you pack it into a backpack of skills and go into life, and suddenly things appear. Someone said it's better to have dumb luck than no luck at all. And in my case, I never, for one thing, there were no opportunities in law enforcement at a federal level. I didn't even plan because I didn't know it was there. You know, when we graduated from college at the Beta Rho chapter at the University of Colorado, there were 3 things you could do. You could be a teacher, you could be a nurse, or you could be a secretary. And that's really what was on the agenda. And in my case, my mother had wanted me to get an MRS degree more than anything. And I said, Mother, I don't think they offer that. And she said, oh, yes, they do if you look hard enough. And you'd be amazed at the women these days who, when I say that, say, oh, Masters of Related Science? And I say, yes. Have you watched Lessons in Chemistry? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But no, I never planned it. And the thing that's been interesting is that I think my background was always a love of marketing, and I probably picked that up working in the sorority as a pledge trainer and as a active member of the Panhellenic. I was president of Panhellenic my senior year, and I think I learned a lot about marketing and liking to make things happen. So really, that was what I would have majored in, but they didn't have that in those days. They didn't have television. They didn't have any of the things that I ended up doing later. So I got my elementary education degree, and then I went searching for something that would take me where the action was. And that wasn't going back to Pueblo, Colorado at that time. It was in Washington. It was a very turbulent time. It was an exciting time. It was a frightening time. And I decided I wanted to go to Washington and see if I could have an impact in some way. And somehow it worked out with a lot of help from the Dean of Women. That's who it was.
That's awesome that you were Panhell president even back then. And it's very cool to me that this role is even still continuing to this day. In what specific ways do you feel that being a member of Gamma Phi Beta, the Beta Rho chapter, or being Panhell Pres prepped you for your experience as a Secret Service agent?
Oh, very, very much. Because there was no degree. And, you know, you talk to young women now and they're getting a degree in public affairs or public relations or advertising, all these kinds of things. There wasn't anything like that. Now, if you were brilliant, you go into the business school, and the women I'm sure and I know that majored in business. But I could immediately see that this was an opportunity I was not a legacy. I came from a family in the Midwest, grew up in Colorado. I had never planned on really a sorority being part of my life, but it was offered as something that you should go through when you went to your freshman year. And I had a very open mind as to what it was. And all of a sudden met these really fabulous young women that I felt tremendous friendship with, and thought, this is a big space. And if there was a way to maybe narrow it down a bit to have good friends, and obviously women who taught me a lot about what they had already learned, and it probably was one of the many. I have several components that I've used along my life, and one was my athletic upbringing, my ability to shoot cans off a post, because my daddy told me he could show me how to do that. And then a high school that had a shooting range in the basement of the high school, because I'd learned to shoot cans off the post. This high school had a women's rifle team. And
Sounds like Colorado.
Yeah, that's in Pueblo. Yes, in the basement, and we'd all go down there and shoot these guns. And in fact, at my high school reunion, the high school football player, who was really cute, came up and he said, I remember you. And I said, well, I was most athletic of the class right across from you. And he said, you're Kathy Clark? And I went, mm-hmm. He said, oh, you used to spend time shooting guns in the basement. So, I came from a broad background. And then, of course, the sorority did exactly what I thought it would, which gave me a home base and great friends. And then the Panhellenic experience gave me leadership skills that I probably wouldn't have had otherwise. And I learned how to speak. Because I was Panhell president, I spoke a lot to groups, and that has come into part of my life now. So if you really look at your life, and you look at most women or people who are older, they're not doing what they majored in. They had no idea that they would end up doing what they do. And I think you tend to go things, if you're lucky, you tend to go to things that are your passion, that you enjoy in your life.
I agree. I think that even for myself, I've been given the advice of look at what you love to do, make a list, what you're most excited to do each day. And that's going to drive you towards where you want to be career-wise. And it honestly sounds that your role as a secret agent kind of met a lot of that.
Well, it did, but I didn't know it would, because the position didn't even exist. It was both interesting and it was also kind of frightening. I did get the job to go to Washington. I did learn very early on that it's location, location, location. You really had the opportunity to look anywhere in the world to go if you weren't afraid to do it. And, I use this term, just do it scared. And I can remember then a lot of people were scared. They didn't know what to do because there were so few defined outlets for being what you wanted to be. So when I got a call, I talked to the Dean of Women, who I knew because I'd been President Panhellenic, and I said, how could I get to Washington? There were protests in the street. We'd think of the turbulent time. Bobby Kennedy had just been assassinated on my term in college. Martin Luther King, and of course, John F. Kennedy was assassinated in 1963, just before I went to the university. So our turbulent times in Vietnam, and boys we were dating were going through the draft, and it was a terribly turbulent time. But I felt like that's where the energy was, the action, the change, and certainly the women's movement was changing significantly. And we weren't even really sure what it was, and we weren't really a part of it at that point. But to just be around the excitement of it is what I wanted. So I got the job working for a congressman in Washington through this introduction from the Dean of Women, who she actually called him on the phone. It was kind of funny. She said, Don, his name was Don Brosman. He was a congressman. Don, this is Polly Parrish. And I have a senior in my office here who's been very active in the community of the school. And she's a good leader. And I think you should hire her to be your one of your aides or staff members on the Hill. And there was this long pause, and I'm sitting there hoping, and he says, can she type? In those days, that was the only criteria for almost any job. You had to be able to type, take shorthand, type 60 words a minute, all these kinds of things. They didn't ask about anything else I might have done. And I said, yes, I can type. And so he gave me the job. So anyway, I think that answers your question, but it was a very different time. We were jumping into an opportunity that wasn't really receptive because there weren't many.
Something that has really stuck with me, this journey that you've been along, Kathryn, there are a lot of people who might find themselves in similar situations where they're running up against, well, this job has never existed before. This thing I'm about to do has never existed before. And for a lot of people, they might think that and go, oh, well, I'm never going to do it, right? Like that is sort of a barrier in and of itself, that no one else has done this before. You did something that no one else in our sort of arena had done before. Why did you persevere? What was it that like drove you through this thing that I would imagine would be
very daunting?
I'm imagining to be slightly difficult to become a Secret Service agent. I've never gone through the process myself, but I'm assuming that there are like multiple levels of, the agility, the fitness, the knowledge that you had to bring to the table. Why did you continue forward in this thing that had never been done before?
I tell the story in the book that I wanted to be Annie Oakley when I grew up. I grew up in this little town of Pleasant Grove, Utah. I had a daddy who was just a really great daddy, and I was a great daddy's girl, and he taught me how to do a lot of things. He bought me an old horse named Roxy, and we lived in a tiny little kind of a farm, cherry orchard, beautiful place in the heart of Utah, just below a mountain. And I had heard about this woman who was a little tiny thing that was a sure shot in the Buffalo Bill Wild West show. And here I was, probably 8 or 9 years old, and there were not very many women to look up to say, boy, I'd like to do that. Wonderful women, but not adventurers or done exciting things, certainly not astronauts. So I wanted to be Annie Oakley. And I told my daddy, I said, I want to grow up and be a cowboy. And he said, well, girls can't be cowboys. And I said, well, what about a cowgirl? And I said, well, that's fine. He said, well, there aren't very many. And I said, what about Annie Oakley? She's a famous person, and she's done things that no one else has ever done. So he said, well, you want to work on that. And I said, first thing I have to do is learn how to shoot your old 22. So he took me down to the one day he picked up a tin cannon, took me down to the North 40, if you will, back 40, put that can on the post and started to tell me how to shoot this old 22 gun. This was when I was about 8. And I was so excited. This was my shot at being Annie Oakley. And he put the gun in my shoulder and sighted it up and showed me how to look at that little bead down at the end. And then he said, now breathe and slowly squeeze, squeeze, squeeze. And tears started running down my face. And he took the gun out of my hands. He said, what's wrong? I thought you wanted to be Annie Oakley. And I said, I do, but I'm scared. All little girls always, their backstory or their fallback default, to use a computer term, is I'm scared. And he said, Kathryn, if you're ever going to have a life that you can write a book about, or it's an exciting life, you're going to have to do things that scare you. And he said, I'll bet by the end of your life, they'll be the things you said you really love doing. And I have carried that with me, that if it's a little scary, it's kind of fun. And so this did not frighten me at all. I had been working for this congressman, and it was interesting. I was a military caseworker, and I was helping young men that would write into the congressional office and help them with compassionate reassignments and all these kinds of things. And what I found was that it was routine. It was predictable. I don't like predictable. I almost set it up that it isn't going to be predictable. And so one day a girl was telling me that we went to lunch and she's eating a tuna sandwich and, she's in a hurry. And she says, oh, I forgot to tell you. A guy called and said the Secret Service is hiring women to protect Tricia Nixon, the president's daughter. I said, really? You can't mean it? And she said, oh, yeah, they're looking for a few girls off the Hill that they want to interview. I said, well, what do you have to do? She said, oh, well, you only make $7,500 a year, and you have to die to save the president, and you have to be able to shoot a gun. I can do that, I said. And she said, okay. So that's where it all changed.
So you heard what would normally be a barrier to other people as like, check, check, check. I have met all of those items.
Where do I go? Where do I apply? Sign me up. Drop the mic.
Coming into this interview, my foundational knowledge of the Secret Service is basically Frank Farmer, Kevin Costner's role in The Bodyguard. I don't know a whole lot entirely about what Secret Service agents do, but for everyone listening, what does that job fully encompass? What were your responsibilities?
When I came in, there were 350 male agents, and they hired 5 of us to augment, to become part of what they do. And what they do is their primary mission is protection, and that's protecting the president, vice president, foreign heads of state, members of their family, children of an ex-president until they're 16, I believe. Things that even if the president tells the Secret Service to protect the Mona Lisa when it came here on tour. So in protection, I'll give you a typical day. I would go in, I lived in Washington, and I had gone through extensive training in jujitsu and hand-to-hand combat, and I had already known how to shoot a rifle, but they trained me in handgun training, and they trained me with tear gas and investigation and working undercover and all these things. So I was trained at that point. And then they dropped the 5 of us in all these different jobs that agents do to test to see if we could function, if we would do the right thing, if we fit the mold. So a day for me, for instance, would be I would go to the Washington field office. I would investigate criminal offenses against currency where people were stealing government checks or they were passing bad checks. I would usually be assigned with a partner. Then another day, a male partner, a female, and then another day they would say, oh, you've been assigned to a protective detail. For instance, one day I went to work and they said, you need to go and find they just said, you're going to be assigned to the White House to protect the Queen of Spain. Now, I had been doing some training like this kind of thing, but all of a sudden I put all my files on the desk and off I go over to the White House, and I'm introduced to the Queen of Spain, and that I would be her agent, her special agent, protecting her and staying with her within her perimeter for the next however long I was assigned to her. And then after that became the traveling compartment or part of it, where they left after 3 days in Washington for a whirlwind tour of the United States. She and the king were actually tourists. And so the night before they left, after I'd been at a state dinner with her, which is a whole nother story on its own, they said, she likes you, we want you to go with her on the detail. They called the group of people assigned to protect a certain person or family or whatever, a detail. And they said, we're going to take you on the detail. Can you be ready by 7 o'clock in the morning? And we'll be leaving by chopper Marine One from the South grounds. And I said, of course. I had nothing to wear. It was in the heart of Washington's big winter. And they were flying out the next day on Air Force One to Los Angeles and Southern California, then on to Houston, and then to the Apollo 14 blastoff in Florida. So you had to kind of jump and figure out how to fit in that I could go to these dinners and these events. And finally, the blast off of the Apollo 14 rocket with no time preparation or anything. You did a lot of what they call playing it by ear and pulling on any kind of idea that you could to be able to do all the different things they would throw at you. That would be a day I'd come back. They may send me to one of the assignments where I was protecting the children of John F. Kennedy and Jacqueline Kennedy in New York. They would send me at a day's notice, at an hour's notice, they would send me to New York to be with Caroline, for instance, if she was doing something special. Then I would come back to Washington and work undercover work. I worked undercover and worked buying counterfeit money as an agent with the male agents, where I was essentially the girlfriend of the bad guy male agent who was undercover buying counterfeit money, which was really scary. But it was also kind of fun because I got to do a lot of acting. I had to act as though I might be a woman on the street, because I was hanging out with this bad guy. My mother would have been horrified, but it was all those things could happen in a week, in a day. Now with the Kennedy children, I was assigned to work with them for 2.5 months on the island of Scorpios. And I was an undercover camp counselor in Austria, and just incredible experience, both for me to go to places I never would have gone, but to be with them with that responsibility of their personal protection. So that's kind of what you do. And then you do training and you try to be a better shot, and they teach you how to drive the cars and the follow-ups, and you stand a lot of boring post as well, where you just stand there for hours for your rotation. And then does that give you some sort of an idea?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And I have to ask you, since you brought up the Kennedy family, you've protected these absolutely amazing people. Do you have a favorite personal moment or personal memory with any of the first family members or any of the important people you've protected?
There were few. I'll be honest. One of the things that you had to be able to learn to do was to be there this close. And if something happened, for instance, you would be the personal bodyguard for that person and cover them with your body, as Flint Hill did when he leapt on the limousine when President Kennedy was shot in Dallas. That is one of the things that you do uphold, that you will give your life if you have to for the individual that you're protecting. So you have to be in the zone around them to be able to do that. With Caroline, it was particularly difficult because she didn't like having protection. She was 14 when I first started with her. And, she didn't like having it. I was not her best friend. I was just in the background there to make sure nothing happened to her. For instance, they told me off the record that I was to keep them comfortable, keep them happy, keep them entertained if need be, and to keep them from embarrassing the President of the United States and their mother, Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis. Big job, wouldn't you say?
Very, very big job. That's a lot of, again, you're kind of taking on a lot of responsibilities that have really not been done before.
Yeah. I'm also thinking of myself at 14, and my job was to embarrass my mother. And so to fight against that.
Yeah. So this was on steroids. A personal moment for Caroline was that she and a girlfriend, I was supposed to follow them to school. Her mother just wanted me to follow her down Fifth Avenue and in this heart of Manhattan in a car and follow her. So they thought it would be funny if they went across the street and walked the other way down the street. And I'm driving. As if, she thought it was funny. So I had to go up and turn around and come around and put the red light and siren on the top of the car. And I'm driving through traffic to get up with them. And I finally caught up with them so I could follow them down the street. Then they went the other way. So that was a personal moment that probably changed our relationship, because I just about had a heart attack. And I just said, when we got to school, I said, I can't do this. I'm not losing you on my watch. So if you want to play that game, we'll get the big guys back. And she was much, much more reasonable about things. But a personal moment with Jacqueline Kennedy was that after I had been with them for 2 years and had been in Greece twice, she turned 16 and was sent to, or not sent, her mother let her go to Spain. And it was the first time she'd ever been really alone and without an agent since she was born, or agents, or a detail of agents. And I'd been with her all summer, and I was just in the peripheral, and we'd worked out a really good system. So I let her have her privacy, but I was always around. And her mother was walking out of the airport. We had just put her on the plane where she was going to Spain. And she looked at me and she said, well, who's going to buy stuff? Because I always carried money, and she never did. Of course, they reimbursed me. But it's kind of like going to college, when you leave your mother.
Yes, absolutely.
And I said, oh, you'll do fine. And then as we were walking away, Mrs. Kennedy was walking across this cavernous waiting area in the Athens airport. It was marble, and visualize the widows in Greece were all dressed in black, and they were scrubbing the floor with these big brushes. It had kind of a rhythm to it. And here was this woman that I had watched in the Zapruder films as a high school girl, survived the assassination of her husband in the back of that limousine that was so horrific, who had then had at the youngest age of any first lady, became first lady, was in there such a short time, then reinvented herself as a new wife with Aristotle Onassis on the world scene. And there was a sadness as she walked, and it was like watching a transition of a woman's life right in front of me. And then she turned around and she said, in her breathy voice, she said, I would really like to thank you for being a friend to Caroline. She said, you're there for her, and I appreciate it. And she doesn't have very many. in many ways, her life is quite lonely, probably because of the life that her father and I chose. But that touched me a great deal. And another time she was talking with Caroline when we were at the tomb of Kennedy's tomb in Washington, in Arlington. And Caroline said, Mommy, why didn't you bury Daddy in Boston? Because that's where their homeland was. And she said, well, there was one time that we were driving back to the White House and we were at this spot overlooking the White House. And he said, if I could spend my entire life in one spot, it would be right here. And she had remembered that. And that's how they chose where his final resting place would be with the eternal flame. So it wasn't that you knew them personally, but you were in attendance for some remarkably historically relevant personal times. And I've been very careful not to tell things or talk about things that aren't just a little that I shouldn't. And my book was approved by the Secret Service because I just talk about fun things more than anything. I talk about the funny things that we had happen.
You know, it seems like parts of the job do have an element of loneliness when you're a Secret Service agent, that you're alert all the time. But you had this remarkable relationship to be entering into this visionary new role with 4 other women. So I am curious, what was that sisterhood like amongst you? Because it does feel like there would be a sense of sisterhood. And in what ways was it similar or dissimilar to your time in the formal Gamma Phi Beta sisterhood?
That's a very good question. We are still friends. We're all older now. We're all over 70, which is kind of incredible for us. I just saw them all about 3 months ago. But one of us, Sue Ann Baker, has had a stroke and she lives in Florida. But we still share the bond, just like, the bond of the sisterhood, because we did it all together. And I think it was professionally the professional bond. The sorority bond was more a growing up bond, I think, and learning to trust people and learning to have great friends that I still keep today that make the world smaller. And I think sometimes the world gets so big that you lose the touch of your footprint and the footprint of other people and the kindness and the goodness. And actually, I felt similar to both. But we shared a lot of funny stories and jokes and whatever in the Secret Service, as we did in the Beta Row chapter. There are still some stories I can tell about them, and in my speech, I just might, so they better come.
That sounds like both a threat and an invitation, which I'm very excited
about that window that got opened by a pledge to let them in one night when they were a little late, shall we say.
So something that I'm hearing you talk a little bit about, Kathryn, is this idea of trust. I kind of heard it in your Caroline Kennedy story about like, you need to build trust with the people that you are also protecting, because if they trust you, there is a reciprocal relationship there.
Very much so. That's the absolutely most important thing.
So I'm also hearing that in your Gamma Phi Beta experience too, and that like you might have trusted your sisters in this experience. So as a Secret Service agent, as a Gamma Phi Beta, how do you build trust with people in such it sounds like a both a stressful environment in terms of you're protecting them, but also you want to make sure that there is some rapport, some friendly connection there. So how did you build trust with some of these people?
Well, the slogan of the Secret Service is worthy of trust and confidence. It had a reputation of being one of the finest law enforcement agencies in the world when I joined it. And it was there for a specific reason, and that was to protect our country, our government, and our leaders. It was very clear that if you didn't feel that way, you shouldn't sign up. And I think the sorority had that same, it had parameters. In those days, we had study halls. In those days, we had pledge trainers. In those days, years ago, we were depending on one another for both friendship and camaraderie and help. And that was something that came naturally as maybe the recipe for what a sorority is. There are lots of misnomers about sororities. I went in thinking you only could get into a sorority that like my friends who were legacies or whatever, whose mothers were there. And it was much more pushing a social acceptance than it was what happened to me, which was finding a cadre of friends who were always there for me. And I think it's a similar, I think you determine if you're going to put yourself in an environment of trust and confidence. And very quickly, you just understand that it's a two-way street. And if it doesn't work, either you don't belong there or someone else doesn't belong there. I'm a great believer that people know what they're getting into for whatever reason they're getting into it. And there are just some people who thrive and some people who would rather be loners and rather do independent things and not become part of a team. The term "the detail" said it all. Everybody had everybody's back. Everybody was looking for the same thing. Everybody had a common goal. And I think the sorority experience I had was that everybody had a common goal of looking out for each other, having a wonderful time in college. I remember my speech I gave at the end of my senior years was that it was these 4 years we will sometimes we will never forget and always remember as the best times of our lives. And you always refer back to college like that as, oh, remember this and remember that. And we thought it was so hard, but we were so, so together in our own personal journey and crisis that the camaraderie was absolutely without question.
Wow. Well, I have to say, it seems as though your position, I mean, in both sorority life and throughout your tenure as a Secret Service agent, required a lot of different skills, be it trust, be it state of mind, be it preparedness. What advice would you share with everyone listening that you think that they could apply to their daily life that you learned during your time as a Secret Service agent?
I have a t-shirt that would be the first thing. And it says, go ahead, underestimate me. That'll be fun. Now that leads to another one, which is, go ahead, try to make me angry, but I have a sense of humor. And I'm going to use that sense of humor all the time, not debilitating myself to being silly, but I could always diffuse a situation, both in school or in a meeting or with people. Example, I was making an arrest with a big guy, an agent who was large enough that he could have been a halfback for the Dallas Cowboys. We were going out to arrest this woman that was in our files as having stolen checks. There was a lot of noise and banging and whatever. And the rule is you go into an apartment like that, it's very quick. You break down the door and you get whatever's in there and you take it down, in other words. And he looked at me and he said, "You're so tough. Why don't you break down the door?" I said, "You're so tough. Why don't you break down the door and I'll shoot it. I'm a better shot than you."
Yes.
A sense of humor has served me. And I was listening to a podcast recently with Michelle Obama. She has a wonderful sense of humor. She was the first woman of color to be the first lady. She was doing an interview, I think, with Oprah in this podcast. And she made the point that being first, you had to be flexible. You're always going to be underestimated. You've got to have a sense of humor, but you got to do what you're always going to do better than anybody else, or certainly better than you think can do, and leap tall buildings the best you can. But if you hit the wall, have a sense of humor and just say you didn't calculate. She didn't say that, but I'm saying anger doesn't help for me in any of the positions that I've been in. I hosted a daytime talk show for 18 years, and I've seen people in positions just yell at a cameraman or angry about this, or, it doesn't help. It doesn't. If the world would quit being so angry and have a little sense of humor about some things, we'd be in a lot better shape. So she and I would say a sense of humor was one of the best things. Another good line I heard was, once you're, the first rule of holes, once you're in a hole, quit digging. Now that's an interesting thought, because sometimes we get so wound up in being concerned about things like whether you were going to find a husband in college or whether you're going to pass the course, or in this case, how long I'm going to live and what I'm going to do with my life. But if you dig it too, it'll take you down. So you better just quit digging.
Well, I do have a little follow-up question for you based off of your answer. Being the first, there's such pressure to be the best, to never fail, to always, be the top of the line. And we're humans, and we have to know that that's not possible, and that I'm with all the pressure of never failing and proving yourself. How did you give yourself grace in those moments when things didn't go so right, when you were trailblazing? And what would you say to women or people listening to this who are struggling to meet that certain standard?
I think I just push through, and I still do. When things don't go well, I really have this belief that things will work if I stay focused and I make it happen. I was never, strangely, my book is called Scared Fearless, but I wouldn't say I was ever really scared. Working a crowd of 1,000 people where you're walking down the line and seeing people at the edge of when the president, for instance, gets out of a car, or your protectee goes into a line that has people that has not been checked. You're looking for anything unusual, a bulge in a coat, someone wearing a heavy coat during the summer, someone with a big bouquet of flowers. You're looking for so many things that it's almost like a blur. But if you just keep doing what you think you should be doing, somehow you just do it. And you put the scared thing in the back. I think there's some element of I think you're empowered when you're scared. Have you ever seen a group of people go up and pick up a car when they weren't frightened about something?
Yes.
Have you ever heard of people saying they were so scared they did things that were just almost an out-of-body experience? I think I'm a kind of an adrenaline junkie. I always have been. Live television is one of the scariest things you could ever imagine, because it's just you. And if the people in the booth mess up, or if someone faints, or a cow falls in the middle of your studio, and did
a cow fall in the middle of your studio?
Yes, she did. Daisy. I love the term "play it by ear." I asked an agent in charge of foreign dignitaries once, you've taught us how to shoot and jump and do and be and all these things. What then? And he said, you just have to play it by ear. And I asked Clint Hill why they chose me. Of all the women in the country, here I was, a little sorority girl from Colorado with an elementary education degree. And I said, why me? And he said, well, you could shoot, you could play tennis. You were a good skier, competitive skier. You could teach children. You could do all of these different things that we need to put agents in. This is a very distinctive niche about the Secret Services. For instance, I read that they had to find someone who would ski with Vice President Ford. They didn't have an agent on the detail that knew how to ski. So they quickly went out over the whole country and found agents who could ski that could go along with them. Part of the protection is being next to them. So you have to feel comfortable at a formal dinner, at a White House event, on a ski slope, walking down the street, anywhere, drive-in movie, whatever it takes. You have to look like you're supposed to be there, and then you have to take the action if something goes wrong.
I'm fascinated with the stories. One of my favorite stories, speaking of White House dinners or presidential dinners or important dinners, was quickly getting a formal outfit ready thanks to an experience in Gamma Phi.
Yes, that I gave direct credit to Gamma Phi, because when I went to Washington, I had a pledge formal. A nice little velvet bodice number, nipped at the waist and whatever. And for some reason, I threw it in my little suitcase when I came, or in my car. I drove back to Washington in a 1959 Volkswagen named Stubby. Well, anyway, I still had this Gamma Phi Beta pledge formal. And when they asked me if I would like to work or they told me, you will work the state dinner tonight with the Queen of Spain. Do you have something to wear? Now, keep in mind, the men all wore tuxedos. They rented them, and the Secret Service paid for it. But they didn't plan on us what to wear, what to carry our gun in, all these things. So I said, yes, of course I have something to wear. See, there I was going to make it happen if I had to run around the neighborhood and borrow one. But I ran home, and we lived in Georgetown in 44th Street. And I ran into the house and I said, quick, you got to help me. I've got to be back at the White House in 25 minutes in a formal ready to go. And I said, I do have. So we pulled the old Prudge formal out of the plastic in the closet. I pulled it on, and I laugh about how girls will understand this. As I pulled it up, I wondered if it was going to zip in the back, when we used to wear tight things.
Oh, yes. Oh, hey.
Just going up the middle of your back. Now, people say I talk too much about clothing, or men do, but clothing is a real problem for a woman on a detail like this. So anyway,
I can imagine.
and the clock was counting down, and my roommate said, oh, here, wear my wiglet. It will make you look a little more foo-foo. So she pinned a little wig thing in the top of my hair. I don't know if it even matched, but anyway, I felt very foo-foo, and we ran down to the White House, and then realized the only purse I had was this great big hunker of a brown purse. And my fashion roommate said, you can't go to the White House carrying that purse. I said, well, where do you want me to put my gun, my badge, my commission books, my 16 rounds of extra, what am I going to do?
What a cool problem, by the way. Like, where am I going to put my gun in my badge?
But do you think James Bond ever worried about a purse? Probably
No,
not.
yeah. He was much less concerned. He had lasers to flip over whatever happens to the James Bond.
Now, and the women all wear suits. They wear pantsuits, black pantsuits. They all wear, most of them wear bulletproof vests. I mean, it's a much different story. When we were there, they didn't really know what to do with us, but they felt, and particularly Clintfield, felt like bringing women into the fold would make it better. Now, there's always a question about parity. In those days, we were 5 among, I think it was 350 male agents.
Ooh,
very
disproportionate.
Yeah, but it was very small. Now they're telling me that, like, I think I just said that earlier, 3,200 agents, 7,000 in the whole cadre of everybody that's involved, whether it be logistics or White House police and all this kind of thing. But you still have to be qualified for what the job is. Does that make any sense? I think.
Oh, yes.
And now 25% of the people are women, the agents, and they are qualified for what they do, and they may bring some skills and opportunities from their life that makes them more involved in the protection by being comfortably infused into it. Does that make any sense?
Oh, yeah.
And so that was the fun thing for me when Hill said Agent Hill said they hired me because I could do so many different things.
I think like really what we're talking about here is the fact that all of these skills from such a diverse subset of your backgrounds were what made you such a great candidate for the Secret Service. It is your diverse background that like really helped you excel.
It's really true. And I think in some ways when you join a sorority, you're not mature enough to look at all the things that it brings to your life. Mm-hmm. You're 18 or, but I don't think we thought seriously enough about what you could learn by being there. I don't think I really looked at learning things focusedly till probably in my 30s, when I started to see that volunteer work made all the difference. We had learned to volunteer as Gallupies and loved doing it. But it was an important thing. I won an award for starting an event in Corpus Christi to raise money for fighting breast cancer. And someone said about volunteerism at this award that we're one of the few countries in the world that volunteer, that have organized in-house, in college, in sorority, in life volunteer efforts.
And what's so amazing is you've lived through such an interesting time for women, and in terms of women's rights and forward movements and progressive change. I am curious about any memories that you have about changing things up and finding independence and things that weren't available to women before the 60s.
Nothing was available to women. We couldn't get credit. You could not get a credit card unless your father or your husband signed on it. I drove to Washington using an old Conoco card that had belonged to my father or had his name on it. You couldn't borrow money to buy a home, even if you were independently employed. You couldn't buy a car unless you had a credit card or an account. It didn't happen. I talk to girls in college now and they go, what do you mean they just won't even take your application? I'm like, you didn't get one. And that was one of the fun things for me, is that when we were sworn in, they actually gave me, along with the gun, the badge, the commission book, the extra rounds of ammunition, and blah, 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 blah. They gave me an American Express card, and I still carry it from 1971. Doesn't give me any clout with them, but I keep thinking, hey, I'm an old timer here.
I love that.
It was one of the most unbelievable things to learn that you could borrow money to start a business, which you couldn't. Many look at it as a women's wet revolution, really, in the 60s and the 70s, because the other thing was we never even thought about it. I think women were wearing, I don't know, it was like we didn't realize how unfair that was, that women couldn't get credit if they deserved it. No, you still need to do it properly. We didn't realize that there were so few opportunities. There was never any talk of my going to grad school. My job was to find a husband, and then I would work to put him through medical school or grad school or law school. That was the plan for women. And it was true. I'm just reading a book now that it was true in England. Women just were not thought to be appropriate or willing or the right kind of human to go into the workplace or create an independent life. And we're a long way down the road. It's better. In my speeches, I will say, how many of you were the first woman at something? And I would say 50, 60% will raise their hand and say, I was the first woman lawyer here, or I was the first executive director of this, or I was the first president of that. It's unbelievable. If I said to the men, how many of you were first at what you did? There had been men in those positions a long time. And it was expected that they would do that. And when you wanted more money, if you haven't watched Lessons in Chemistry, that's really funny. That was my time. They say, what was I most scared of? I was scared that the five of us would not do well. If we had not done well, if we'd blown it, if we'd been too silly, or we had failed the trust and confidence thing, if we had offended a protectee, then the whole program never would have made it. It's kind of like the success of the astronauts. There have not been all women or even 50% women, but the ones who have done it extremely well. And I look back at women who did challenge the status quo, and for the most part, they've been people like Eleanor Roosevelt, who was a tough gal, who was looking out for the people, for the impoverished. People like Sally Ride, who wanted to be an engineer and wanted to be in flight and did become one of the first women astronauts. Like Michelle Obama, who says, keep a sense of humor, do good work, be kind. Those are, but be strong and don't underestimate yourself. Other people may, but maybe that's an advantage. So don't underestimate yourself and do something great that you can write a book about. And I think it magically sometimes happens.
Wow,
anyway.
that is amazing. I mean, I think that is just such a beautiful demonstration of womanhood and his life, how we all come from these different backgrounds and all come together. And I think it comes back to what you were saying about, we have these fearful moments in life, but sticking together, moving forward, moving onward. I think that that's absolutely amazing.
Well, and you don't think about it. The one thing I say about caring for my husband, because that was probably one of the most frightening things. He had Alzheimer's for 10 years. And I speak to that in my speeches sometimes too. And the fact that when he was in the throes of Alzheimer's, the point was it was better to be kind than right. Because I knew what was right. I knew what he should be doing, what he should be watching on TV, these special videos. I knew where he should go. I was his charge. He was my charge. I was his agent at that point. But I finally learned that my being critical of things he was doing wasn't going to change anything. So I might as well just go for the ride and be kind about it. And instead of making him watch PBS, I let him watch Three Amigos over and over because every time was new. That's another good thing to remember.
I love that. I'm going to keep that with me for a while. Be like, it's better to be kind than to be right. I think there is a lot to learn from that singular sentence.
I do too. It's such a simple thing. I deal in real simple thoughts, to be honest. And that's been part of my fun. But I think Gamma Phi was a simple thought. These were women I liked, girls I liked. And I've remained friends with them. They were a canoe for me in a big ocean of college. Gave me incredible opportunities. So I thank E. Adeline Curtis, Helen A. Bingham.
The quartet.
Helen M. Dodge and Frances E. Haven. Yeah,
Harry
those are.
Bingham. Yes.
There we go.
You got him. You got him.
Yeah, those girls.
Those girls.
You guys were pals.
Well, you know what?
It took a team.
Yes, I think back to those four women, and we're kicking off this year, this 150th legacy. And these are women who are going to college for the first time that women are being admitted into college. They are not seeing people that look like them, act like them, have the sort of social treatment around them. And to be able to link up and stand together and create that common bond. Look at the three of us now and where we are here. It's absolutely amazing what they did.
And the bond is the key. And I don't know, but when you meet another Gamma Phi, it's like, oh, you're a Gamma Phi Beta. And it's a bond that gives you almost immediate friendship. It gives you a lot of great memories, and it gives you the length of friendship. And who can't use another friend? And I do think that sororities, and particularly my sorority, Gamma Phi Beta, has been an incredible impact on my life. So thanks, gals. I'm glad you started us all in the right direction.
Yeah, a huge thanks to our founders for that. I found out recently that one of my best friends at work is a Gamma Phi Beta. We had just connected immediately. We had this immediate bond. And then she heard I was doing this and she was like, I am also a Gamma Phi Beta. And it just solidified our friendship.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
You can do no wrong.
Yeah.
Yes.
I
took a skiing lesson one time, she had just gotten out of college. I'm not a great skier, but she was teaching me. And she's like, oh, I was in a sorority, and kind of bashful about it. I'm like, oh, which one? And she was all, oh, it was called Gamma Phi Beta. I'm like, that's the one I was in. Look at my sister teaching me how to ski.
Well, it's a bond, and it's a treasured one. It really genuinely is.
Well, we're closing out on our time together. I think we're a little bit over time. So, Kathryn, we just have a couple rapid fire questions for you.
Something we're hoping to ask all of our guests.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, Kathryn, what Gamma Phi value resonates most with you? Love, labor, learning, or loyalty?
I think loyalty.
Oh. What is something that's brought you joy this week?
I was with my sister, who was 90 and had survived a horrific car crash a year ago. And there were 14 of her grandchildren and kids that were there. That touched my heart and brought me joy, because our family has been able to stay together, even though we're all over the country. So think about that. Don't let that out of your sight.
Yeah. Do the things that are important to you now in the moment. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. We've just got a couple more. Kathryn, what is something new that you've learned? It could be something recent that you've learned. It could be a small tidbit. It could be something really big. Just something new that you've learned.
I've started Pilates. That's
Ooh.
something new, and I really like it. I thought those reformer machines frightened me. I thought that looked.
They're a little scary.
Hey, they look like torture devices. They are intimidating everyone.
I may start another book project, but not right now. But right now, with my physical health, I'm trying to get healthy. So I'm walking and exercising and doing Pilates and trying to beat the clock.
Hey, I love the Pilates introduction here.
Yes.
Okay. And then what is something that you would tell your college self? So thinking back to college, Kathryn, what is something that you would tell your college self?
I think I would have told me to rethink what I majored in, that to try to get something that was a little bit broader, maybe, or a little bit more narrow. Today, you have so many majors. So if you really have a passion in engineering, I thought engineers drove trains. I mean, those kinds of things didn't even exist. But focus a little more and maybe find out more about majors and what you're going to study. And I think I would say to myself, take it more seriously. College was both a party and an adventure and a lot of fun and a great sorority, but I wish I had focused on something a little broader in the sense of skills that I could have created for myself. I think I would have taken it more seriously.
Yeah, it's not just going to class. It really is a full experience of gaining independence for the first time for most kids. So that's interesting. I just have a couple more for you. This should be pretty quick. What was the moment you chose Gamma Phi? Like, what made you want to join that one?
One of it was meeting a woman that I really liked, who really I clicked with, that rushed me.
That's awesome. If you could nominate any person in the world for membership in Gamma Phi Beta, who would it be?
Michelle Obama.
Yes, we would welcome her with open arms. This is our invitation to Michelle.
Come join.
I think she's probably already at a sorority, but I think she would be really far-thinking and out-thinking and fun, regardless of politics. I just, either that or Oprah, I suppose. That would be fun.
Both great additions, I say.
I can't think of anyone else right now, but I'm sure there are a lot.
Hi, listeners. I'm Jessica Budjanowski, and welcome to True Connections, your source for Gamma Phi Beta information, special stories of our sisterhood, and tools to get you involved. I'm a member of our National Foundation Board of Trustees and a part of the 150th Pride and Recognition Committee. My journey with Gamma Phi Beta started as a founding member of the Zeta Z chapter at the College of Idaho. Today, you heard from Kathryn Childers, and just like Kathryn, our sisterhood is known for breaking barriers and being trailblazers. As many of you know, in 1874 at Syracuse University, students and friends Helen M. Dodge, Frances E. Haven, E. Adeline Curtis, and Mary A. Bingham decided to do something about gender alienation on their campus. In an effort to create a welcoming and supportive environment for collegiate women, they founded Gamma Phi Beta Sorority. We were the first female organization to use the term sorority. Gamma Phi Beta's strengths as a premier women's organization is due in large part to the thousands of alumni who have served as volunteers, starting with our early initiate, Florence Palmer, who presided over the first convention in 1883. Whether volunteering locally as a chapter advisor or serving at the international level, our volunteers have shown time and time again what it means to be a true and constant sister. For me, I've continued to stay involved with our sisterhood since college. I've traveled across the country, I've stayed up late during recruitments, I've led teams of volunteers supporting our chapters, and I've helped build new sorority programs. I've even led a song or two at convention. But nothing compares to the connections I have made. Serving our sisterhood has provided endless opportunities for personal and professional growth, with lifetime relationships and a whole lot of fun along the way. Our sisterhood connection is about aligning our values with one another, lifting each other up, and making our world a better place. I know that I have made a powerful impact in our sisterhood, but it's not about what I have done as a volunteer. It's about what I've learned and the people I met that inspire me to live our mission. It's never too late or too early to volunteer for Gamma Phi. Visit gammaphibeta.org/volunteer to view open positions and learn more about giving back to the sisterhood that has given you so much. I'm Jessica Budjanowski. Let's keep connected until next time.
The True and Constant podcast is brought to you by Gamma Phi Beta Sorority. Special thanks to our co-hosts, Emma Oremus and Lex Stewart. Jessica Budjanowski for the True Connection segment. Our editor, John Haight, and executive producers, Megan Kruger and Shauna Wilson. Our theme music, Panko Breaded Pork Chops, written by Michael Thomas Gager, performed and produced by Mikey Gager. Thank you for listening.